Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the study of antiquity and the Middle Ages. As always, I am your host, Nick Barksdale, and today we are joined not just by one, but two very special and awesome guests, Dr. Amy Kaufman and Dr. Paul Sturtevant. Thank you both for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Before we get started, I like to do what I always do to really introduce my guests to my subscribers, and I was hoping to have you both tell us a little bit about yourselves. So, Dr. Kaufman, would you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you love doing what you do?
Sure. I used to be a professor of medieval studies for about 10 years. I left academia willingly. I know a lot of people don't leave willingly, but I was much more interested in the writing I was doing than in being part of the full structure. So I'm freelance writing now. I wrote this book. I'm working on a memoir, and I'm working on a novel. Why do I love the Middle Ages? I was attracted to it primarily because I went looking for something to show me why the world was the way it was, and when I got into studying the medieval world, it completely surprised me. I expected to find all kinds of things that I didn't find there, and instead I found this world that was totally alive and very similar to our world, but also radically different. So I just fell in love with it. It's a fascinating period.
That is absolutely awesome, and I feel the same way. When I first started studying medieval history, my parents had bought, me these really old, outdated, we're talking like late 19th century, early 20th century books on the Middle Ages. So I had this very interesting view of the medieval period until I started reading newer stuff, especially when I got in my teens and early 20s, and it just completely turned my world upside down. I'm always saying, for people who think the medieval world is black and white, you're in for a really rude awakening. And it's absolutely fascinating. And the more that you get into it, and especially with the work like you are all doing, and we'll come to that in a minute, completely turns that world even more upside down, because it's not just showing how many of us may have misconceptions about the medieval past and what those conceptions are, but how in many ways your work is widening it and making the Middle Ages even more complicated. And that's just another reason why I love it. Dr. Sturtevant, would you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and why you love it as well?
Okay. I have several hats, so I'll try to describe each of them in turn. I'm Paul Sturtevant. I am a public medievalist, and what I mean by that is medievalists obviously are people who study the Middle Ages, and to that I add the moniker from public history. And the study of public history is about what people know about the past, how they learn about it, and how also to teach people about the past. It's about reaching and connecting with the public, connecting the public with the past. And so I'm a public medievalist in that I do that specifically with the Middle Ages. I did that with my PhD, where I studied how people learn about the Middle Ages, and particularly what they get out of their consumption of pop culture. And that ultimately resulted both in my PhD and then in my first book, The Middle Ages in Popular Imagination. And also from that drive to understand what people know about the Middle Ages, and also to present the Middle Ages to the public, in 2016, I founded a website called The Public Medievalist. The Public Medievalist is a site that publishes articles written by some of the best medievalists working today. These articles are written specifically and explicitly to be compelling, to be meaningful for people, to be free, and to be written in a way that you don't need to have a PhD in order to understand. They're meant to be read by someone on the bus on the way to work. And that's how Amy and I met. We met, we orbited each other in scholarly circles for a while before then, but then Amy and I started collaborating on The Public Medievalist. And together we published a special series that is still ongoing now on race, racism, and the Middle Ages, and then another special series on gender, sexism, and the Middle Ages. And so that is kind of my life as a public medievalist. For my professional life, I work for the Smithsonian, for Smithsonian organization and audience research, using that public outreach skill as a way of better understanding Smithsonian visitors, doing visitor research to help make the Smithsonian a better place to visit. So that's kind of all of my various and sundry hats. Why I like the Middle Ages, I have been a nerd, a big old nerd, since I was very small. I was that kid who was reading David Macaulay's books, Castle and Cathedral, until the covers fell off. I was that kid who built castles out of balsa wood and crystal light containers, which is maybe the most suburban 90s thing I could possibly say. And then from there, I devoured medieval fantasy books and medieval history books, much as in the same way that you were saying, anything that my parents had in their collection. I joined reenactment groups. I studied it here and there in college, but really it was at grad school that I really devoted myself not just to enjoying medievalism, the way that the Middle Ages are kind of remixed and reinterpreted by contemporary culture, and really dedicated myself to studying the intersection of the actual Middle Ages and the contemporary public.
What led you to write The Devil's Historian?
So for me, writing The Devil's Historian is the end point of a long story of the study of medievalism, especially in American culture. When I was a doctoral student, I had studied partly medievalism in the 19th century South, the slave-holding Southerners, and then also the Klan and Reconstruction. So I studied that a bit, and then I took my first tenure track job in Macon, Georgia, which is a little town. It's a city. Sort of. But when I got there, I found that everything I'd been studying in grad school was alive and well in this town. There were neighborhoods with street signs like Robin Hood Lane and Friar Tuck Circle and King Arthur Court. There were all kinds of, this was about 2007, 2008, there were all kinds of educational books on the shelves at the grocery store, like Raising a Modern Knight and His Princess. My students had gone to purity balls, which are kind of medieval themed balls that are all about a girl's virginity. And my college, Wesleyan College, it came out about the second year I was there that they had sort of rituals. It was a women's college, so they had sorority style rituals, class names, etc. Came out that they were all based on the Ku Klux Klan, which was awful. One of my colleagues revealed it. It took them another 8 or 9 years to actually get rid of them. There was a big fight, but they were medievalism, right? They dressed up as knights. They took oaths. They did all kinds of things that were saturated with medievalism. So while I was there, I started studying contemporary medievalism and American culture, and I found that what was going on in the South, particularly at that time, had begun to spread, right? And an obsession with the Middle Ages had begun to spread to things like the alt-right, things like ISIS in 2012 and 2013. And with internet culture and meme culture, it really seemed viral, the way that people were using the past. And so I began writing about it then. And I think I wrote a piece for Paul on ISIS. And that was my first piece at the Public Medievalist. And then when the alt-right really came out and started going to rallies with, shields and swords and all that stuff, Paul and I decided we really had to do something. So we started the Public Medievalist website, and then Toronto invited us to write the book.
Dr. Sturtevant, what led you to write The Devil's Historian?
Much like with Dr. Kaufman, my journey to publishing the Devil's Historians is pretty long. In the research that I was doing for my PhD, I found that the public's understanding of the Middle Ages was laced with some pretty noxious stuff. I had already done previous research on depictions of the Crusades, and had found that in my research that the Middle Ages was something that was ripe for abuse and use by people to promote racist, sexist, Islamophobic viewpoints. And in my first book, you can find discussions of masculinity and racism and things like that I found in my research. And I think that there was something that particularly got my attention in 2011 was the Norwegian terrorist attack by Anders Breivik, who in his published manifesto styled himself as a Knight Justicar of a new order of the Knights Templar Europe. He created a costume for himself. It's both utterly ridiculous and something that we have to laugh at it, and we also have to take it deadly seriously, because it is literally deadly serious. And so it was something that had been percolating in my mind for a long time. And so that's why some of the earliest articles, even on the Public Medievalist, you'll find are ones that are like Amy's piece on ISIS that you'll find there, that they are addressing the ways in which the intersections of the medieval past and the contemporary present can be very toxic ones. And much like Amy said, as we continued to collaborate and as we saw the world change around us and saw the way that medievalisms were being used more and more, increasingly, and more publicly to promote hateful ideologies, we found that we had to write this book. We published the Racism in the Middle Ages series, as I mentioned before, and the University of Toronto Press got in touch with us at that point and said, is there a book project in here somewhere? At which point I turned to Amy and I said, do you want to write a book that talks about what we've been talking about here and more? And that's what you'll find in the Devil's Historians, is some of the ideas that Amy and I were working on when we were working on that series, but also a lot of other ideas and a lot of other isms that we have been researching and addressing since.
Pretty sure I shared the series y'all did on race and racism in the Middle Ages, and yeah, the responses I got for that on my Facebook page alone, the study of antiquity in the Middle Ages, really was like, it already sealed what I'd already thought in my mind. It's like, yeah, I should definitely do this. And when I got such flack for it, I was like, yeah, this definitely needs to be done more, because it really challenges people's, not just their narrative, but it's how they've been taught to view the past. And so many of them, and I mean, I was like that too, we just didn't know any better, right? It's like you read these historians' books that are super old, you're influenced by certain YouTube channels that I'm not going to name, and you do get this very skewed version of history. And when someone challenges that and actually hits you with the complicated facts, it upsets a lot of people. And I mean, I get that, but y'all are doing such an awesome job, and I feel like it's the duty of this channel to really help get that out there. You know, it has to be done. And it's like you said, certain things about like the shooter, it's like, yeah, there's certain things that are very laughable, but in the end, he formulated his beliefs around these ideas, and in the end, he killed so many innocent people due to those beliefs. It's like we could even talk about the fascist obsession with ancient Rome, from Fasces to fascism, right? And there's so many dangerous aspects to where people like you, I mean, you do your job in ensuring that it doesn't happen again, you know, and by doing that, you teach history, you know, and not just history, but historiography. What are some of the important aspects of the book that we can expect to learn from it?
So we try to do two things in the book. The bulk of the book is talking about extremist movements, sort of from the end of the Middle Ages on, and the way that they view the Middle Ages, the way it was sort of invented in the modern mind. And and all the different myths that people have about the Middle Ages, and the way that each myth lends itself to violent extremism. Like not necessarily the facts of the Middle Ages, often a misbelief about the Middle Ages, but how that feeds a narrative of violence, a narrative of oppression, a narrative of imagined racial or gender superiority. So we break the book up into sections on things like nationalism, racism, Islamophobia, and antisemitism, sexism, and we talk about how groups have used pretend histories to commit violent acts and to oppress other people. So Nazi Germany is a very common example. They were obsessed with the Middle Ages, the Ku Klux Klan, which I mentioned earlier, varying radical religious movements from different religions, sometimes political movements, sometimes national movements, such as the Hindu nationalist movement that's going on right now, such as the Brexit movement, such as a lot of American politics. So we trace those, and then in each chapter, we try to give an introduction or a preview to what the Middle Ages was really like on this subject. So for instance, if someone believes that the Viking Middle Ages gives them an excuse for genocide, we talk about how the Vikings were actually fairly multicultural, right? They traveled a lot, they traded a lot, they were interested in learning. So that's just one example. We try to break up the myths, figure out what kind of harm they're causing, and then dispel them as best as we can.
And one of the things also to follow up is that even though we split up the book in this way according to these isms, sexism, racism, nationalism, Islamophobia, things like that, it's important to remember, and we talk about this in the book, that these are not isolated. These are hatreds that are comorbid, that people who are racists are almost always also sexists, are Islamophobic, are anti-Semitic, and that a descent into extremism in this way usually involves collecting these hatreds as well. And so an expression of, say, a Crusader meme isn't just an expression of nationalism. It's usually an expression of Christian extremism as well, and usually has components of militarism and sexism thrown in there for good measure. So though we separate it into these chapters for ease of consumption, so that at least people can understand the structural things that are going on, it's like the spokes of a wheel. It ultimately all connects together.
So now, Dr. Sturtevant, how has your work been received so far, especially involving the Devil's Historian?
The Devil's Historians thus far has been received pretty well. It's early days yet, as we all know, but we've had talks with a number of different institutions and people around the world about it, both in England, recently in Brazil, several podcasts, and now your good show here. Trying to launch a book during a pandemic is unique, to say the least. But overall, it has actually been very positive. And one of the groups that I'm really excited about that we're reaching out to now, and that we're in talks to try to do some work with also, is in the professional social justice community. People who are seeing these hatreds on the street, and where we might be able to offer some context to help them understand why of the what that they're looking at.
I think from what we've heard as far as feedback so far, that what we tried to accomplish with the book is working. We very much wanted the book to be accessible, and the press really helped us with that. They made it affordable. They didn't ask us to use any jargon or, make it too dense the way a normal academic book would be. We wanted it to be an introduction both to the issue of extremism and the use of history, and also to the medieval world in ways that people hadn't thought about it before. So we've gotten a little bit of feedback from people who are teaching with the book, or from lay people who are reading the book, and they say that it's accessible. So that was kind of the most important thing to us.
I mean, that's so brilliant. I mean, you're making it cheaper for people. It's easy to where almost anyone can read it. I mean, from the novices like myself to professionals. And that's really what matters, especially when you're wanting to get your messages out there, educate the public, work with the people on the streets who are seeing a lot of the stuff you're writing about. And the fact that you're doing that and you're not making it to where it's this highly esteemed that only, certain people can have access to it, that's brilliant. And that's what history is supposed to be about. And I love it. So that's really, really great. Okay, so Dr. Sturtevant, what are some examples of extremists today who misuse the past?
There are lots of them. There are, unfortunately, lots of examples. One of the examples that I look at in the book is actually Catholic extremists. Catholic extremists, when we tend to think of Christian nationalists and Christian extremists, Christian supremacists, in America at least, we often tend to think of the evangelical movement. But there's actually another similar movement that's happening within the Catholic Church that is equally, if not more, problematic. And it is that the Southern Poverty Law Center has actually said that Catholic radicals are possibly the largest group of anti-Semites in the United States. And there are organizations and these are organizations that are using the Middle Ages as an attempt to try to see a glory time for the Catholic Church that they want to return to. Obviously, it was no such thing, that there was a lot more religious plurality, both within Europe and also with the greater medieval world, including the Muslim world, and even further beyond that. But they see, these radicals see the Crusades and the Inquisition as things that either are regrettable but excusable, or as things that they want to return to. They also, as I said before, these hatreds are very comorbid. And so their anti-Semitism is comorbid with their religious supremacy, is comorbid with their sexism as well in particular. And they are promoting a very particular idea of masculinity and manhood. In the book, I talk about a conference that they had about raising knights, raising your young men to be knights in a way that is extremely patriarchal, really gross, and has absolutely nothing to do with medieval knighthood.
Dr. Kaufman, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I can give you another example, which, as you probably know, nationalist movements are rising up all around the world, and nationalist leaders are obsessed with the Middle Ages in many cases and often make laws, have their guards dress in medieval clothing, and have a lot of nationalist medieval rhetoric, which is a contradiction in many ways that we can talk about later, in order to promote violent agendas, right? Whether that's to make war on their neighbors or to oppress their own people. So in Brazil, Bolsonaro is one example. He's constantly evoking the Crusades and the supposed whiteness of Brazil. Putin is another example. He has had statues erected to his namesake, medieval Prince Vladimir. Trump is an example with the medieval border wall that he erected. Brexit is an example where you will see Brexit campaigners with St. George's Cross on their shields. In the Hindu nationalist movement, there's often an argument that Muslims took the land in the Middle Ages, and so there are violent, murderous campaigns against Muslims in that region, and even Erdogan in Turkey. He just converted the Hagia Sophia back into a mosque, right, based on a medieval grudge. So all around the world, not just fringe extremists, but people with real power are using the Middle Ages to make actual changes and very violent changes to their nations.
On a side note, I know you've made 40% of my subscribers mad with the Trump comment, but I think you won them all back with the Turkey Hagia Sophia comment. So we're at an even kill.
There you go.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for joining us here today at the Study of Antiquity in the Middle Ages, to where we have discussed a variety of very interesting and awesome topics that you need to know about and do your part as well. I'm bringing this to you. They have so graciously given us their time and expertise today, and now I want you to take this knowledge and give it to someone else, because that's the thing. We may be novice historians, they may be the pros, but we can do our part in helping teach history and make history matter. And it matters even more today. Dr. Sturtevant, Dr. Kaufman, thank you all so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having us. This was really fun.
Yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate it.